Jared and I's group name was Fear Us, and our group topic was fear in sport and how the idea of fear plays multiple roles in competition and sport more than we think it does. We have organized this presentation to make it easier for viewers to follow along just how Fear Us found and interpreted our findings throughout the research process. We will go through not only our own findings, but other researchers' findings and use them to come to a conclusion of how fear plays a role in sport. You might be wondering, why fear? Or why we chose fear as a topic to relate to the sport world. When brainstorming ideas, Jared and I both had this topic on our list, and were interested in finding out how big of a role fear plays in the many perspectives that sport has to offer, from the player to the coach and all the way to the fan. We knew this topic had a lot of material in it, and finalized it to begin our research. To start off this research, we compiled a bunch of definitions of fear and compared them to the best ones that we thought would help us most and explain what fear is. Using these definitions, we were able to get a better understanding of what fear was. We will look at these definitions shortly in the presentation.
Scales to measure fear. We looked at how we can measure fear within oneself. We also looked at how we can measure fear within a sports fan, a coach, and an athlete's perspective. Research trend. From our research, we have found that fear within sports is trending, and more people are trying to figure out ways to overcome fear itself.
For our research, we were assigned certain research questions and focused on these questions along the way. We wanted to define fear from a sport fan perspective, as it can differ from the players and coaches. Then we wanted to come up with items or a scale to better measure fear of a person. Lastly, we will take a look at all of our research and conclude some trends we found in that process.
Theories of fear. We looked at 3 different theories derived from fear. Each one of these theories gives a direct representation of how fear affects individuals. These theories include the multidimensional anxiety theory, the extended parallel process model, and the skill-focused versus distraction theory. The multidimensional anxiety theory represents how an increase in cognitive anxiety has a negative effect on performance. This also shows that the 2 components, being cognitive anxiety and somatic anxiety, influence performance differently. As you can see, the higher anxiety, the less performance that you're going to get out of your athletes.
The extended parallel process model focuses on how when a person detects fear, they will most likely break down under pressure as a result, and also use that as preparation for the next time they face a similar situation to be able to overcome that sequence. Almost anyone who becomes successful in life has failed a lot and used those failures to better help them in the future. This process can be concluded and summed up as using failures as a lesson learned, and using this lesson learned as a hand in succeeding the next time. This all is resulted from fear of the situation the person is put in.
The skill-focused versus distraction theory explains how adding pressure to a situation has a negative effect on the processing of that situation. The more pressure you add to situations, the slower the processing of the information is going to be. This can be shown with these 2 models on the screen. What is fear within sports? Fear is being afraid of a factor in sport, or approaching a potential threat within the sport. These are more definitions of fear outside of the realm of sports. In conclusion, fear is almost always negative, which, as we've seen already, results in poor body preparation and execution, which increases the chance of performing badly. We all need to understand where our fear comes from and how we can overcome the fear itself. Fear is really just false evidence appearing real. It creates a negative mindset of thoughts and diminishes mental toughness, which can have a negative effect on playtime. Fear can be controlled when approached correctly otherwise.
Summing up all the literature we use in our research, we can conclude that fear has an effect that causes people to have somewhat out-of-body experiences or overall just uncomfortable experiences that make changes to the person themselves completely. And although fear usually is looked at as a negative thing, it can have positives in that it teaches us a lesson on how we can better ourselves and prepare for future situations that we can succeed in. Next, we decided to do 2 expert interviews to get others' thoughts on fear and further our research on the topic. We interviewed both Dr. Chang and Dr. Gonzalez of SUNY Brockport. We asked them 4 questions that relate to our topic. First question we asked them was, how do you define fear? The second question we asked was, how does fear play a role in the context of sport? The third question is, what is one way people overcome or handle fear? And the final question was, does fear of failure play a role in sports? Looking at each question, we gathered some solid information and perspectives on the topic of fear. The first question was how they define fear. Both Dr. Chang and Dr. Gonzalez had similar answers, and that they think fear is an uncomfortable, out-of-body experience that no one wants to feel. When asked if fear plays a role in sport, they also both had similar answers, saying that fear of injury is on the minds of a lot of the players in their respective sports. Dr. Gonzalez took it a step further and brought up a good point with how in extreme sports such as skateboarding, snowboarding, fear can be more serious, but can also be practiced a lot more and may be easier to overcome because they are solo sports. When compared to sports like football and basketball, where you can't really overcome fear of your competition until you play them in real time, both had very helpful answers for our research here. When asked how people overcome fear, Dr. Chang concluded that he usually talks to someone or prays to someone he trusts in order to help him get out of the difficult situation fear puts him in. Dr. Gonzalez went back on the topic of extreme sports in his answer. He said snowboarders practice getting over the fear of not being able to perform a trick by going into something like a foam pit and repeating hundreds, maybe thousands of times in order to perfect that trick and be able to land it when it matters most. He also brought up how athletes use alternative forms of therapy, such as meditation and yoga, to clear their mind from any negatives or fearful thoughts ahead of big-time games. In the final question of whether fear of failure plays a role in sport, both agreed it does. Dr. Chang said performance-wise it does, and people know when you lose it can lead to angry fans, high tensions, and possibility of a lost job. Having a fear of failure can lead to those bad consequences. Dr. Gonzalez said fear of failure plays a role in athletes trying to preserve their egos and not wanting to look bad on the grand stage. But in order to succeed in life, he said failure is necessary, and not everyone realizes that. Sometimes people just give up after one failure because they don't want to put themselves through that potentially fearful and anxiety-filled situation again, but it could just be one step closer to their success in life.
We looked at fear from 3 different perspectives. This is because all these perspectives have different stems of where their fear comes from. Athletes exemplify fear when they are scared to let their team down or scared of doing something that might result in their team's loss. From the owner's perspective, fear that failure will lead to the loss of an organization or not achieving of what is expected of them. From the fan, an example of this could include fear of losing a bet on a game or fear of missing the game. This could also be fear of missing out. From our research, both of us agreed that fear plays a big role in sports. Fear of injury is probably the most common fear that can be found in sport. Fear can have negative and positive consequences. It all determines on how well you handle them. The definition of fear in a sport fan perspective. Fear is a negative feeling leading to negative outcomes. This can be proven with a loss of a game because of fear, loss of money because of a bet, or a loss of an organization because of the fear of losing.
The EPPM scale is used to measure fear in a person and looks at how people act and react based on their fear levels. It uses a 0 as not detecting fear at all and 5 as being the most feared on its scale. This scale concludes that when a person is fearful, they either ignore the fear or are forced to deal with the consequences because they are in an uncomfortable position and don't know how to deal with that threat. The next scale we looked at was one we made on our own to measure fear. The scale was based off a questionnaire survey and asks athletes or fans of sport to see how much fear affects them in their perspectives. We made separate surveys for athletes and fans to further our research and lead us to more specific conclusions. The overall reason why scales are good for measuring anything in research is that it gives a lot of data on your topic. It gives you an outsider's view of the perceptions on the topic itself if you don't have too much information on it yet. And overall sets a standard or sometimes shows that there is not a standard or normal belief on the topic of research. Scales can be used through online or in-person surveys, which are a great way to gather quick information, especially for research.
The Performance Failure Appraisal Inventory, or PFAI, is a multi-dimensional measure of cognitive, motivational, relational appraisals associated with fear of failure. Around 544 college students completed the PFAI and a variety of other measures. Collaboration sample analysis reduced the PFAI to 25 items measuring 5 appraisals in a higher order factor structure that demonstrated tight cross-validity in the second half of the sample. The 5 adverse consequences of failure assessed by the PFAI include experiencing shame and embarrassment, devaluing one's self-esteem, having an uncertain future, important others losing interest, and upsetting important others. A 5-item short form also demonstrated tight cross-validity. Fear of failure was associated with high levels of worry, somatic anxiety, cognitive disruption, and sport anxiety, as well as low levels of optimism. General fear of failure was unrelated to either perceived competence or fear of success. Research trends. From our research, we found that anxiety can act as a high for some athletes. Fear can play a big role in an athlete's performance, and overcoming fear is effective if done correctly. From our research, we found that practicing fear can give your team a slight advantage in game time situations. Fear environments or practices can also have benefits on the way your athletes perform. We learned a lot of valuable information from researching fear. The first idea we noted was that fear has a connection with a lot of negative feelings and very rarely leads to a positive outcome right away. Having a fearful mindset on anything will more than likely throw off the person in whatever they are doing. The second idea we learned was that if you know what fears you or you think you know, it is best to practice situations in which you face that fear, so when it happens in real time, you are able to overcome it. This is especially relatable in a lot of sports where practicing plays a large role, but not everything can be practiced. When those unexpected fears hit you in real time, that's when the consequences are faced the hardest. The last idea we learned is that we can't live life without fear. Fear makes us who we are, and we all have different fears. Fear also forces us to overcome things we never thought we could overcome,
and makes everyone a stronger, more balanced person in life. We obviously learned a lot more in this research too, but these 3 ideas stuck with us the most.
Future research and conclusion. We found that future research can be done on examining the effects of anxiety on the processes that underpin performance. And we can also be more specific on what we research in fear. We need combined theories to get a better understanding of how fear interacts with the body. Individual performance psychology can also be improved.
That concludes our research on fear presentation. Thanks for watching.